Have you ever felt completely stuck in a part-time job? You desperately want to leave, but you have no idea how to do it without everything blowing up? It's a super common feeling, especially if you're a student trying to juggle everything. You feel trapped by your shifts, your boss, and just the fear of having that awkward conversation. Well, today, we're going to break down exactly what your rights are and how you can plan your escape.
Okay, let's get right into it with a question that really gets to the heart of the problem. This came from a university student who's working as a tutor. They feel totally overwhelmed and are wondering, hey, can I use one of those professional resignation services even for just a part-time gig? And the short answer? Yes. But the long answer? That's where things get really interesting, because it's all about knowing your rights, which is way more powerful.
So you've decided it's time to go. The very first move isn't to start writing a resignation letter or planning what you'll say. No. The first thing you have to do is figure out the legal agreement you're actually in. Because before anyone, a lawyer, a resignation service, anyone, can help, they need to know what kind of contract you signed. That one document basically sets all the rules for how you can leave.
Now this slide here really simplifies a super important distinction. For most part-time jobs, especially if you're getting paid an hourly wage and you work scheduled shifts, like our student tutor, you almost certainly have an employment contract. And that is fantastic news, because it means you're an employee and your right to quit is actually protected by labor law. The other kind, a service agreement, is less common, and it treats you more like a freelancer, where the specific words in that contract, they rule everything.
All right, so now that we've figured out you're most likely an employee with legal protections on your side, the next massive question is about timing, right? How quickly can you actually walk out the door? This isn't just about ghosting your boss. It's about doing it the right way, following the actual legal process.
And to figure out your timeline, you just need to answer one simple question. Did you agree to work until a specific date? Like for the summer or until the end of March? The answer to that question splits your path to freedom into two totally different directions.
Okay, so if your contract has a clear end date, that's what's called a fixed-term contract. Leaving that early can be pretty tricky unless you have what the law calls an unavoidable reason, like a serious illness or a family emergency. But, and this is a big but, a lot of student jobs don't have a formal end date. You just kind of work there until you quit or they let you go. That's an indefinite term contract, and that, my friends, gives you a whole lot more freedom.
And this number right here, this is the magic number. If you're on one of those indefinite term contracts, which again is super common for part-time work, the law says you can resign at any time for any reason at all just by giving 2 weeks notice. That's it. So even if your company handbook says you need to give them a month, the law generally overrules that and backs you up with a 2-week minimum.
Okay, let's talk about the big, scary thing that holds so many people back. It's the fear of, if I quit, especially if it's kind of sudden, can my boss actually sue me? It's a terrifying thought, so let's get really clear on how real that risk actually is.
So let's be real. The risk isn't completely zero. If you quitting suddenly causes a direct, provable financial loss to the company, like, for example, a tutoring center loses a high-paying client because you left their kid right in the middle of cramming for exams, they could theoretically try to sue you for damages.
And just so we're all using the same words here, damages isn't like a fine or penalty. It's a very specific legal thing. The company would have to take you to court and prove, with evidence, that your actions directly cost them a specific amount of money. It's actually a pretty high bar for them to clear, but the threat can feel very, very real.
But here is where the story takes a massive turn. Our student tutor revealed something really important. They were hired to be a tutor, but now they're being forced to do sales, hand out flyers on the street, and work at events for parents, stuff that was never, ever part of the deal. And this changes everything.
You see, if your employer isn't holding up their end of the contract, it totally weakens any claim they could possibly have against you. Them breaking the contract becomes your best defense. It's your legal counterpunch. You can basically argue that you're only leaving because they broke the agreement first.
And, underneath all the legal talk, there's this really raw human feeling. The student just admitted they were completely burned out and had lost the will to even try anymore. And that is so often the real reason people look for help. It's not just for legal advice. It's for a way out when you were just emotionally done.
So, let's say you've done it. You gave your notice, you served your time, and you are almost free. But hold on, the process isn't quite over. There are still a few really important rules you need to know that are all about what you do after your last day.
The classic dilemma. You actually like the students you're tutoring, and they like you too. It's the company you can't stand. So can you just, cut out the middleman and set up a private deal after you quit?
Yeah, unfortunately, the answer to this is almost always a big no. Most contracts for jobs like tutoring have a clause in them that says you can't work with or even contact the company's clients for a while after you leave. It's there to protect their business, and it's legally binding, even if the family is the one who reaches out to you. You can always try to negotiate it, but honestly, it almost never works.
So if you do decide to go with a resignation service or a lawyer, what are you actually paying for? Well, it breaks down into a pretty simple three-step process. First, they look at your specific contract and situation. Second, they send the formal, legally correct resignation letter to the company for you. And third, and this is the best part, they take over all that stressful communication to finalize your exit so you don't have to.
Now, this is a really crucial point. The standard service is all about dealing with your employer. What it does not automatically include is managing the conversations with your clients, in this case, the students and their parents. That part is usually still on you, though sometimes you can pay extra to get help with what to say in those messages.
Ultimately, what this all comes down to is empowerment. Just understanding that you probably have an employment contract, that you can most likely leave with just 2 weeks' notice, and that you have a powerful defense if your boss broke their promises first, that knowledge gives you control. It changes you from feeling like a trapped employee to being someone who has real options. So the only question left is, what are you going to do with them?